All right, welcome back to the RETCON 2021 Build Summit. I hope you're having an awesome time so far. Our next panel is titled Deliver Data, Not Documents. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And Tim, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Great, thank you. Welcome to our panel discussion entitled Deliver Data, Not Documents. I'm Tim Bakos, an architect at Perkins&Will, principal and director of project management, and one of our teams spearheading our firm's evolutions in AEC project delivery. Today, I'm joined by this talented crew of partners assembled for our discussion. Together, we have Tom Zahner. He's with Zahner Company. He's their COO, and he's a fourth-generation ambassador of metal craft. He represents one of the oldest trades, but now helps one of the most technologically forward, data-infused design partners that firms like ours teams with. So thank you, Tom, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan Seckinger, structural principal at Walter P. Moore, who's engineered some of the most complex structures ever imagined for construction, and whose firm has proven benefits from the digital data they embed in their own design scope for its ultimate use in their own review of the trades that fabricate, assemble, and final construct that work in the field. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Tim.
And James Barrett, Turner Construction's Chief Innovation Officer. For over 25 years, Jim has led from within Turner to adopt the newest, most effective technologies for use in CAD and BIM and delivered as lean or IPD process improvements to the industry. Jim's a real forward thinker, and together we're hoping to define what might become a new method of digital delivery that we hope all our audience members might participate in as a result of the conversations like the one we're having today. So welcome panel. I'll let them each introduce themselves in a minute or so, and then we'll get into some questions. If our discussion prompts you to have your own, please send them in via the chat, and we'll try to reply in kind, or we'll make contact with you after the panel. So I think I'll open with a little framing of our industry's arrival to this kind of tipping point. And then, as I said, we'll hear more from our panel about how we're each ready to streamline the AEC process and should deliver more data, not documents. The goal here today is to communicate how we must be empowered and take action with the technologies now available to us so that we can eliminate the rework of the past, work that used to be necessary as we passed ideas down the production line from the design team's initial concepts to the builder, and from the builder to their fabricating subcontractors. Architects and designers have crafted the instructions by which others build the physical representation of our ideas for hundreds of years. Generations that came before us wouldn't recognize the tools we use to illustrate our craft today. Today, we use like a mouse to move a cursor around a flat panel that shows us rendered imagery, and it's often even computed in the cloud. And usually now we're working barefoot in shorts from home. That versus the rows of draftsmen we've seen in ties slung over drafting tables in a huge room and old black and white photos using ink on Mylar to draw 2D plans and sections and enlarged toilet room plans and such. Over all that time, though, the underlying outcome from our services generally remained the same. We communicate design information, basically like a set of Lego assembly instructions, to a builder who will find those components and assemble them into a real world physical object for us all to enjoy. When you step back to think about it, it's really kind of ridiculous that we imagine a three-dimensional construct in our head, shaped from our experience into a complex arrangement of volumes and spaces, and we smash them into 2D representations on paper, or PDFs now, just so we can give that compromised description of complex building systems to a builder who then has to interpret our error-prone work and assemble it back into real-world 3D form, just as we'd imagined it. It gets to be a lot like that old telephone game where the starting statement evolves as it's passed each step of the way until it's finished. It comes out a little different than we'd planned, no matter the care taken to communicate at each step along the way. And it's been that way for decades or more. So I feel like we have an obligation to change that story. Just as most other industries have had more rapid revolutionary advancements due to the embracing of technology, our industry has fractured from the days of one master builder with a designer on site who directed construction from a far more limited range of materials and from a handful of documents, until now, where we design some of the most complex assemblies of fabricated systems that can now be engineered to be smart, connect to the most environmentally responsive solutions, and use multitudes of necessary specialist designers, engineers, builders, fabricators, the whole gamut, each with distinctly separate, narrowly contracted and scoped pieces of that pie. Technology is no longer a barrier. We can now effectively communicate the wildest of our 3D forms and ideas so we can deliver them. We can't deliver them in the old way with squashed representations of them in 2D PDF assembly instructions. We have to come back together and work so that our uses of these technologies allow us to transform delivery in AEC. So this team assembled here today is just that team with precisely that potential. The team represents authors, aggregators, and arbiters of the data that is relevant at every step of the process. And we've all agreed that we have to deliver that information in a format on down the line that will maintain the highest fidelity transfer of information from initial conception through to construction completion. So Tom, I guess, and then Ryan and Jim, why don't you introduce yourselves a little bit about what you're doing and how you come to this conversation?
So my name is Tom Zahner, Chief Operating Officer at Zahner Company. We do architectural metal work, probably on a little bit more of the complicated side of things. It's a direction we kind of went several years ago, and we've worked with Perkins&Will and Walter P. Moore and Turner on many various and sundry projects that I think are perfect examples of what Tim has presented here, where we're all kind of trying to fighting around the edges to figure out how to move and almost evolve the way we construct. The one thing I'd say about Zahner is we maybe have a reputation for wanting to do odd things and to get involved in odd projects, but I think truly what we really want is to build cool buildings. And the greatest pleasure is when you actually have it done. And I know from talking to people around this table before, that's a shared value that we all have. So.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'll jump in. Also, Ryan Seckinger, Walter P. Moore, as Tim mentioned, a managing director. I sit in Washington, D.C. and really involved in projects all over the country. We're focused on I really like how you put that, Tom. I think got a shared interest in building cool projects, focused on commercial mixed use, healthcare, sports, aviation, and then all kinds of other things. But really picking up on this discussion that Tim started, really interested in figuring out how to help us as an industry take advantage of all the benefits that many other industries already have achieved, and really many industries that we overlap with in our day-to-day life. It's frustrating when we can pick up Google Maps and give us an up-to-date, detailed way to get to work every morning, but then we get to work and we're doing processes that are more in line with the AAA triptychs from 25 years ago or something like that, with markups and markers and stuff. So that's really my interest and excited about this discussion today. So thanks, Tim.
And my name is Jim Barrett. I'm Vice President, Chief Innovation Officer at Turner. I oversee a growing department of people whose mission is really to help people make progress in their lives every day. Help overcoming waste, inefficiencies, so they can unlock their potential and do meaningful, fulfilling work. So we have this very human-centered approach, ultimately thinking about the individual, because we've got great people trapped in systems that aren't, and that needs to change. And at the end of the day, what motivates us is thinking about how we can help both the people inside the company and outside the company. I think, fortunately, this panel comes at an interesting time because the past year has been very challenging, but I would argue that in the past year, we've accelerated innovation by 5 years. And I think that's an opportunity for us at the end of the day to try to reimagine and rethink the systems within which we operate.
We have a lot of time to make up though too, right? If we've only accelerated 5 years, I think we've got a long road to catch up to where other industries have.
We're behind by 100, so.
Yeah, so we got to keep that going for several more. Tom, you and Zahner have become invaluable members of our design teams. I think people might think of Zahner as a fabricator on the end cycle of things, but I think you're really, because you're masters at doing really expressive and complex things with metal, and because those technologies have gotten more complicated and integrated into our building systems, you're really need to be more a partner in the design side of things. So I guess I wonder, from your perspective, in this world of evolved data and in the complex manufacturing processes which you run on your end of things, how you see a company like Zahner bringing front-end value to this proposition in digital transformation and all this hyper-efficient data sharing that we're talking about.
Yeah, Tim. So because of the direction I think we've kind of decided to go as a company, I think we kind of end up at the forefront of a lot of technologies, because a lot of the old technologies that you described don't absolutely work when you get into some kind of nonlinear geometries and you want to take some challenges. So I think by the sheer fact that we wanted to take on this type of work, maybe one might call it risk, we're risk tolerant towards this type of work. We're becoming somewhat experts in a lot of this software and technology, as it specifically relates to architectural metals. But it also makes sense. I mean, we dabble around the edges of a lot of other things that need to use complicated or more complex approaches to define something, and it lends itself well for us to participate in some of the early stages of the design process. One, because I think we do have some expertise in regards to the software, and two, I think by nature of being part of a very risk tolerant company, we want to build buildings at the end of the day, and if we can bring valuable information to the front of the line, that can do nothing but help. In the same sense, we spend a lot of our time talking to the Turner construction companies of the world at the other end of the line, about how we actually going to get this thing built off of a truck and onto a lift and so forth and so on. And so that's another little piece of experience that I think we can bring to the table, and that we're gonna be fussing around at the end of the job. Is there anything that we can do or bring to the table in the early stages to help facilitate? And the greatest thing, like I mentioned in my intro, the greatest thing is when the building is done. Well, the even great thing is when the building is done on budget and on schedule. And I think we really, a lot of people in this industry really mean that. I mean, it makes your life so much easier to do that. So I think we've taken it upon ourselves to try to get involved in the early stages to benefit that whole package, because at the end of the day, we want a great building or art structure or whatever the heck it may be. And whatever we can do to participate in the early stages, I think is beneficial, and hopefully beneficial to the whole industry. So.
Yeah, I think, Ryan works with us his role as a structural principal, and the way buildings are getting much more complex, and it's not as, back in the old days, you'd build with stone and you'd carve something out and you'd push it into place and you'd stack another brick on top, but we're far more evolved and the systems have gotten so much more complex. And Ryan and I've had some great conversations leading up to this panel, in particular about the seeming rise of design build and delegated design systems that emerge from the complexity of those building systems. I guess, Ryan, when you consider the detail engineering you do for every connection and every member and every bolt configuration in the complex shapes that you engineer, what goes through your head when you imagine a third party submitting shop drawings as an interpretation of what you've already structurally proven? That there's data loss there that's being recreated in a manner which perhaps it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Tim. And I think something that Tom just said is really important. I think this idea of perception of what is risk is, I think, really gets to the core of this issue, and really some of the barriers to why haven't we as an industry digitized like other industries. For someone like Tom or I, the way to mitigate risk on a project is to figure it out before you get to the field in a way that it's going to go together quickly and it's going to work and meet the design intent. Where I think a lot of times in the industry, we have a lot of trade partners that see really showing their cards early in the design phase or getting involved with design too much. That's risk. And designers on the flip side saying, oh, well, we can't hand off models because, well, that's risky. Yeah. What Tom said is super important, that figuring the project out before it gets to the field, whoever's doing that as a team, that's what's really going to mitigate risk. The risk is when we don't have certainty on cost or schedule before delivery. And so, that's really been a focus. And I think the key question is, who's the right party on the team to do a certain scope of work. In some cases, it's, let's get a trade partner involved from day one. and they're on the, quote unquote design team. Sometimes it's, in our case, we would like to take steel or concrete or light gauge. In a lot of cases, we're the best party, just carry that on through a fabrication model and not have to have, this difficult handoff of information in the smushed 2D format that you mentioned, Tim. So, I think those are the important discussions that, I think are going to help us to make progress to this end.
Well, Jim looks like he's ready to jump in. I want to say, Jim, with all this shared data and the steady sort of insistence that technology today, I think, allows parties to move back towards sharing information more under one roof, like one team, it really harkens back to the days of a master builder. And it begins to sound a lot more like the kind of control a Turner type team has in today's design build structure, or maybe IPD contracts. Can you talk about the growing interest in design build and how that construct might even evolve with partners such as these to enable sharing data throughout the whole life cycle created to build the complexity today?
It's a great question. It's an interesting one. So I'll actually try to rise up a little bit to a higher level around trends, and then extrapolate from that. So I look at design build. There's a growing interest in it. It was even 5 years ago, it was a fraction of our work. Now it's 15, maybe 20%. We're a $10 billion company. That's a lot of design build work. It's growing in interest from our owners. We've actually built now a design build group inside of Turner that's staffed with technical experts who are looking at drawings. They're architects and engineers that really normally would be in the design community, but we're seeing the need to especially part of our design build work, to bring all the resources we can to bear to make sure that the project is successful. But I think that just the fact, and even IPD is a little hint to this, I think the fact that design build is growing is more an indication and proof that our owners are looking for something, this to be fixed, if you will, for this to be not just the data and it's also changed the processes, changed the models of how we do work, how we work together. And I'll use an interesting example of another, maybe try to prove my point, which is actually WeWork of all things. So WeWork is really interesting, right? 10 million, $11 million square feet under lease. They're actually their largest segment growing. Last I talked to them, their largest segment of customers were actually large corporate customers, AT&Ts, the Facebooks, who came to them and said, I want this product, which is this experience, dynamic environment, collaborative. We love it. This is what we want for employees, and what any company would. Go build me out 100,000 square feet somewhere, and then completely vertically integrated. So they're designing in-house. They have their own construction management. They're even doing fabrication. They set up a facility over in New Jersey. They were fabricating their own office fronts.
Putting us out of work.
Yeah. So you think about that, right? And they offered this product to an owner who didn't want to go through the hassle of leasing, didn't want to go through the hassle of design and construction, just wanted that finished product, which is all they care about, as fast as possible. Money wasn't as much, the cost wasn't as much an issue. So to me, people would say, well, Turner doesn't compete with WeWork. We actually did, and are. There's 10 million square feet where our customers, the AT&Ts, the IBMs, whatever, never issued an RFP for design services, never issued an RFP for construction services, never went out to fabricators. We're competing against essentially non-consumption. The owner's not wanting to use us. 10 million square feet, we never got to look at. So, but the point is, for them to have grown like that and had that much, there was a demand that drove that. There were companies and people that wanted that. There was value that essentially WeWork was unlocking. I think their fatal flaw was around just the wrong leadership, and maybe their leasing model. But otherwise, actually was, you shouldn't discard or dismiss them. They had something. They unlocked value. So to me, I look ahead and I say, design build. But are there other opportunities? Where can we unlock value by just reimagining entirely how we work and how we work together and looking at it in a different way? And so that's what I start to wonder about, is because if you don't, you either disrupt yourself or you get disrupted at the end of the day. Yeah. And at this point, we're flip phones in an iPhone age. So we got to figure this out and get ahead of it.
Well, Tom, you mentioned sort of reimagining Zahner's approach to the market, and I wonder, as Jim's talking about stuff like that, how your mind is spinning around ways to engage the sort of masters of craft that you've proven to be for generations, but in a different way now, because everything relies on a technological tool for communication, and you're processes are modeled in a way that, you know, relies on that.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest hurdles we have to overcome is probably one of the most just basic human struggles to change. And, you know, you look at the newspaper industry and how it has had to change. And we all look at web pages with newspapers and stories, and they're interactive and way more powerful than the piece of paper you used to get at your doorstep. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I think you know, and it's not like we're just these geniuses. I think it's the world we stumbled into was complex enough that 2D drawings just weren't going to work. And we still struggle with it. I mean, we still spend time trying to figure out a way to draw something that's, you know, parametrically curved in 2D. But I think if we can help get people over that, that's great. I think the other big hurdle we have is maybe there's another issue with us. If we were a communist or socialist company, or country, we would all use a specific software and we'd all be merry. But in a capitalist world, you have all these different software packages. They all interact to some degree, but not always great. They all have different strengths. I think that's I think that's becoming. I think you're getting winners, which are going to start showing up, and I think you're getting others that are other companies that are saying you have to be able to interact with this particular entity. So I think a company like Zahner kind of in a situation where we're kind of forced to dabble in that world anyway because of the construction we decided to take on. And one of the things I hope that we all are is somewhat not only advocates for doing it more collaboratively and collectively, and understanding that, you know, you can throw your 24 by 36 drawings on the table and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but also to kind of almost make it a little bit more comfortable for people. And you know, we've got people on our staff that I think have great value in getting everybody seeing it quicker. And that's rarely by taking out your pen and sketching on a pad. It's rarely by looking at drawings. And I think that if you start getting that integrated in those early stages, and if builders like us, manufacturers like us realize that, okay, that's great, but now you got to iterate through the life of the design to the point where I'm on Jim's job site trying to install it. If we don't lose sight of the fact that there's that connectivity all the way through the system, that you shouldn't go from one technology to another. You should have some integrated system the whole way. It can do nothing but help.
Well, it's kind of two things. It's the value of the data that, you know, you've already created for that purpose, or one of our firms has created for that purpose, and then sort of to hand it off to someone else who then has to reinterpret or mash it through an interpretive piece of software. If we were there already, that would be great too. But so often, I think we're discarding it. You know, like you said, it's a stack of papers on the table that you can use as a reference when you go back and kind of build it from scratch. Yep. You know, you don't have to, the creative part might be taken out of it because you can see it on paper and kind of what we intended, but then you're basically modeling from scratch because the language we use to communicate it doesn't work with the language you need to use to produce it.
You know, if I could jump in actually, because this is an interesting topic that Tom touched on something, just, you know, again, your own organization. You know, I was overseeing rolling out BIM, I don't know, whatever it was, 10, 12 years ago. And we also didn't take that top-down approach of mandating a software. You know, we pretty much bought everything. We have licenses for everything. But also I wanted it to also, because it's so early, I wanted to let the market call it, you know, the internal market sort of prove itself out. If you like the tool, fine, use it. If everybody starts liking it, then okay, that's the tool. The challenge, though, again, we end up looking back, I don't know, there's probably a point where you should have corralled that and said, look, you know, you really should be using this for this. We never did, and to this day. So as a result, we got these little pockets of people, little silos that love their tool. This one loves their tool. You can't pry it out of their cold, dead fingers. I mean, it's and that creates challenges. So when you're, again, you know, Perkins&Will produces a model, and you give it to one office. Then we got another job with you, we give it to the other office. You may have completely different tools, completely different ways of looking at it. You know, we use like CostX, and we're using that for taking quantities off the models, but they have different approaches. And And that is a challenge. That's a hurdle. That's a legitimate, but it's hard. And at least in our big organization, it's really hard to mandate, especially now people are sort of, they've settled into their favorites, and that's going to be an obstacle, or it is an obstacle, I think, to this, what we're talking about. That it's
well, Ryan and I were having a conversation about this too, and I think there's the value of the data and the need to maybe recreate it, but then there are situations too where a firm like Walter B. Moore is relied on the expert kind of on both sides. They engineer it, but then they're also there kind of structurally validating the condition in the field, and in many times being asked to review shop drawings that are created maybe by a third party that represent information that they've already engineered, and they already know where the bolts are supposed to be located because the software they use tells that story already. So, Ryan, I don't know how you react when you hear it's that duplicity and that rework that drives me crazy. And I know that technology exists such that we should be able to hand it off. But and then Jim and I each had this conversation around electronic file transfer agreements. That it's like right now we mandate you don't use the digital information we have, and that's like the complete opposite of what it should be.
The first thing we have to do is lock the lawyers in a closet.
Yeah, I've got a good friend that talks a lot about innovation by contract, and that's definitely not how we're going to solve this problem through contractual integration or innovation rather. Yes, picking up on this last thread of conversation. So pretty early on, we made a decision to really focus our skill set not on having a separate team that's kind of outside the project delivery process, trying to develop tools and push those into the process. But we've really spent the last, that same timeline that you're talking about, Jim, of 10 to 15 years, trying to develop skill sets that are really pervasive for each engineer to really be able to have the programming tools, learning software programming, learning visual programming and things like Grasshopper and Dynamo, but having the skill set to be able to work in really a database of data and then be agnostic on platform. Because I think this thread that we're talking about right now of being able to communicate in whatever language you're going along the way, I don't think that's going to change necessarily, because the unique players on a project are going to have different ways they want to see the data and use the data. But having consistency of that data through the project, I think, is what is super critical. And so we can take the same data that lives in a database and go in and out of Revit for architectural coordination. The data is not different, but we could take that same data and go to Tekla for steel fabrication. So I think for us, that's as much about people and culture, about what is your job as an engineer. It's not just to run the numbers, but really manage a process of data flow through the project. That's important. To your point, Tim, I think this idea of us as an engineer handing off to somebody else, kind of incomplete information that needs a lot of interpretation. I think we as an industry have squeezed as much juice out of that sponge as exists. On most of our projects, we're being asked for these, early pre-schematic deliverables that some contractor down the line needs to put some kind of cost certainty on. I think that's a broken system of trying to manage risk. So I think a better approach is really managing the data through the life cycle of the process and handing off something that has a lot more certainty around it. I think we can make that work with schedules based on the savings that we're getting in not duplicating the work. So in your example, Tim, I think I would much rather, instead of reviewing shop drawings, I would rather hand off something at a fabrication level that doesn't take, complete reinterpretation, or work alongside, Tom and his team from the beginning, and then manage that data at a fabrication level. So
right. Well, I have duplicate effort.
Yeah. So there's not this huge gap of reinterpretation. I think the mind shift is really moving from an idea of like, okay, we're going to design and then you're going to build, and those are two different things, to this paradigm of, okay, let's build the project virtually together, and then let's physically implement what we've already figured out. I think that's how we start getting to actual construction field efficiencies and things like that.
So, and it's not just in the moment of that design, but I think Jim and I were talking about, how we talk about delivering data to all our partners. That includes our clients downstream and having a more live connection to evolving data that exists through the life of the job. So we'd be a little remiss if we didn't start talking about the term digital twins and what that means as an evolving deliverable expectation from our clients. That is now possible, to be a future deliverable expectation in our processes. So, I mean, Jim, what do you think of the notion of digital twins as a means for owners and others producing models?
Well, I'll first start with, I think there's different interpretations of what that means.
Yeah, why?
One interpretation is just simply it's an as-built model. It represents what we put in place. Others, though, and I think this is probably the more interesting areas. It's essentially a living model throughout the life cycle of a project that you're also linking information to it, and multiple parties are accessing it. I think our owner. It's funny. Our owners they ask for stuff. They certainly, and they do ask for like turnover. Like they increasingly ask for like an as-built model, turnover, all the information in there. I've yet to be honest. I've yet to see what the value proposition exactly is. I haven't yet heard the story from an owner that says, "Oh, once I got that, I then used it for this, and I saved, I don't know, $1 million." Or I haven't heard that story yet. So I think it's right now. It feels like people are asking for something. Sounds sort of cool. They want it, but I think it's still trying to figure out where that value is.
Well, I can tell you, we've certainly been asked about it by our clients to say, hey, what could you provide us downstream? And the first thing we say is, if we give that to you in Revit, do you have any Revit users on staff? Right? I mean, are you going to be able to even access this in the future? What if Revit ceases to exist? Right? I mean, so
we had a job where they wanted the Revit typically was broken into parts, but they wanted the whole thing stitched together. And we gave them a Revit file that's so big they couldn't open it. They literally couldn't open it. But that's what they asked for. Okay, that's what you wanted.
But isn't this so it's interesting because it's this concept of a model continuing for the life of a building, and you keep using it for stuff. And a lot of our conversation, a lot of our evaluations, Tim, that we've done is looking to validate that model and to make it useful in as early a time as possible through kind of this iterative process. And I'm very curious, and I'd love to hear Ryan's opinion on this too. If you did bring a model in this kind of collaborative, interactive thing really early, isn't it possible that the model that shows up at the end is lighter, is way more functional, we aren't evaluating all the structural risk at the last minute, and then we had to go back and cobble on something to work. It almost grew through these iterative processes, so at the end of the day, you have something that Jim, the client, will use, because it isn't just a model that is, at the end of the day, it actually is everything that we kind of lived and breathed and kind of built throughout the way. And I always think, with the Walter P. Moores of the world, you guys are the ultimate risk managers of sorts, and you have to have. I mean, I'd be intrigued to know how you train or empower people to evaluate risks when there really isn't enough. There isn't the standard enough information to fully do it. We have to kind of say, hey, level of development, I've got to establish, we're at a fork in a road, and the structural importance has to have a decision right now. So kind of going off track. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're gonna have a great building, but I think this whole iterative, maybe you build a better model at the beginning and it becomes more important. So,
I mean, for us, we've always, from a risk standpoint, our policy has been, and maybe it should change someday, I don't know, that, you give us a model, we recognize the minute we get that if anything changes or we do anything to it or what, that's us. That's all on us. Fine. So don't worry about it. We're not going to sue you. In fact, I don't know. We ourselves, and we have probably thousands of BIM projects at this point. I don't remember any form of litigation in any way, shape, or form from anybody. And yet we've got 150 BIM people full time. 70% of our work is our BIM projects in different forms. So we've mostly been sort of like put your guns on the table and walk away. Like let's just work together and figure this out and not worry about that right now. And so it's mostly work, but still there's always that issue of risk.
You see, the opportunity exists right there in the fact that, you hire hundreds of BIM people and we've already drawn it.
Yeah.
Like, so, and Tom needs that information in order to be able to fabricate it. But it's like, how do we simplify that?
Typically, we're not remodeling it. Those people are doing other things with the model. But that also brings up another question to the forefront. If the architect and engineers are creating these models and passing them along, and other people are getting value, should you not be compensated in some fashion?
Yeah, sure. Yes, please.
No, but there is actually, it's interesting because I guess I'm going to be the weird guy, but I've been thinking about this. It's also, how do you manage that risk of handing off a model, which is everybody's worried about if it changes and it's modified. But I don't know if you've seen recently this this thing called non-fungible tokens, where this actually this artist sold a digital art piece for $69 million. But a non-fungible token is a certificate of authenticity, essentially, in blockchain, digital ledger.
Yeah.
Can never be changed, can never be modified. It's a secure identification, that secure copyright, intellectual property, that you have ownership. But as that non-fungible token gets passed on, if you give that product to somebody else, you can set it up such that there's a royalty, for instance. So, but why not? Why can't models? You design a model and people are getting value out of it, including the owner at the end. Why not, as each step of the way? It's secure. Right. That's the first thing. Takes care of liability. Then maybe
because the risk right now is those people would say the data that I gave them in the format in which I gave it wasn't useful to them. It might have, it's like Tom's stack of papers on the desk that he can refer to, and it's it's helpful because it helps identify perhaps the nature of what we need to do. But man, I need to crimp that panel in a different location, and it's going to be perforated in a different way. And boy, these guys don't really know how to build that thing. They just know how to conceive of it as a creative idea. Ryan lives somewhere in the middle. Like Ryan is like, Ryan really does know how it goes together, right? I mean, we're the architect, he's the structural engineer. So, I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I think, this is a really interesting conversation. A few thoughts. I'm still thinking about your idea, Jim, of this NFT non-fungible token. We've done something along those lines of like an end user license agreement for model deliverables. To make sure that it's clear, because there's not a lot of standard around what's in a model or what's not in a model. So making it clear exactly here's what you're getting with this thing. Not that you can't use it, but here's what we intend you to use it for.
You and I could set up a private blockchain. We'll make a killing.
Let's do it. Yeah,
we'll have our own cryptocurrency.
Everybody has our idea now, so thanks. Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, it's gone. But yeah, I'm also thinking about this discussion about why aren't owners using models? I think there's two sides of that, right? I don't think we're yet as an industry giving them something that's useful enough. It's still, we're federating a lot of different pieces, and it's not really a workable single source of data. And then the other side, I think it's this idea of change that Tom mentioned earlier. I mean, a lot of institutional clients that would use this information are still working with a room with, sets of drawings going back to the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And it's a tremendous amount of effort, I think, to change, that kind of inertia from all these organizations that we're working with. But I think definitely as we make more useful models, then the use case will flow from that. I don't think there can be a customer until we're creating useful models. I think that's
and yet in some ways though, all the products we put into our buildings, they're being connected to big data and machine learning, and the Internet of Things is now telling us when I need to order milk because it came out of my fridge. I don't have one of those fridges, but I know that I hear they exist, right? And so, if we have smart buildings and they're only getting smarter, and, I could turn my lights on and off from home in my office through a URL connection. I mean, that's an amazing connection of data to physical things. How do you see, and we talk about clients and owners that may not yet be ready to receive what's coming, but it is coming. I mean, we're being driven to that by the products we specify now with, more intelligence than I think we were prepared. I mean, we're not in the Stone Age anymore. We're not just putting blocks of masonry material together. There's a real intelligence behind our walls, in our walls, and throughout the building. So, how do any of you see the processes that we go through as they relate to the deliverables we rely on from each other? How will that further be impacted by the kinds of things that have already disrupted other industries? I'm thinking like AI, artificial intelligence, and mixed reality, systems, and that's going to really change the way we work in the future. We can't deliver 2D drawings anymore. I mean, that stuff is going to pass us right by.
So
Google's going to start engineering our buildings. I mean,
so we've explored this a little bit in the past year. So I'll jump in real quick. It's just we've been working with actually IBM Watson, MIT team. The interesting thing, there's so many opportunities, machine, there's sort of the spectrum. We're not really into true AI, but there's so many opportunities. But what the first hurdle is? Data and cleanliness and structure of data. We're trying to do even simple analysis within our company, and even looking at different trade contractors, but we spell the trade contractor 100 different ways in our different databases, and you can't connect anything. I mean, you talk about leveraging this then on a project would be talk about standardization. I mean, we can't really figure out models. I think getting us all on the same page in terms of the standardizing how the data is structured or how things are. So that's, I think, again, the data is going to be the hurdle, because that's the most. Once you get that, you can do a lot. It's just the data.
That's exactly right. That's been our experience, Jim. You're right on. Most of our focus has been on creating standardization around data structure for the work that we do. So steel, concrete, enclosure systems. We need to have one standard way that we store and maintain that data for every project. And we've been doing that between our the disciplines that we have some control over. And you're right, Jim. What that unlocks is the ability. Once we have good data, we can start asking ourselves, okay, forget about drawings for a minute. What's the best way to communicate this information? And so, on a project, then all of a sudden we can, we've got a web viewer where we can kind of software agnostically share with the whole project team. This is the overlaid the visual of our steel model, but which pieces of steel have already gone away from mill order? Which pieces are now in fabrication? So instead of us trying to communicate that data through letters or meeting minutes and saying, Mr. Architect, you've got to stop, moving things in this area, or MEP engineer, we can't move the ducts over here. We actually have a visual that we're looking at as a team every week that shares that information in a way that we can actually do something with it. A color-coded pieces of steel that show us, okay, we're done working here and this is where we're focused working. But all of that needs that structured data as a prerequisite.
And again, what you're talking about is great. It's you're taking the data. It's not just the data. It's you're translating to actionable insight.
Well, and Jim, there's another conversation that we had about most projects have unique programs fit to their users, and they're tremendously custom aspects to them, but yet they all share certainly some largely repetitive components like egress stairs or toilet rooms or things that could be customized, but why really, right? I mean, they could certainly be set into standardized components of scale. Maybe you could talk about the way teams could gain efficiency by sharing data earlier and empowering offsite construction to speed the pace of delivery on things like that.
So that's also an interesting one, like design build, somewhat even related. We've seen a growing interest in offsite for a lot of reasons. Actually, for us, and Tom could probably speak to this as well.
Yeah.
Also, mine is we have an aging workforce in the trades, but yet not having a younger generation necessarily fill that. So we're going to have a gap. We're inevitably going to we are losing skilled trade workers, and they're not coming into industry. So how do you solve that? You still got to build a building. So we started an initiative probably 3 years ago, a formal initiative around offsite construction. In fact, we've now set up a group for focusing on that and thinking about our business strategy. So we're trying to figure that out. What's the sort of spectrum of offsite? There can be single trade prefab, multi-trade. You can have modular components, bathroom pods, and then you can have true volumetric, which is the big chunks of buildings. So we're looking at, okay, where can we start pushing this more with? We think it's in that multi-trade and then components, because again, we think this is the answer, and potentially could be the future of construction to start looking at this way, because we're going to have issues. You can move it into a controlled environment, production's at waste level, it's safe, it's better quality. What's also interesting from a design standpoint is it's going to change the design and the design. In fact, what we're also exploring and one of our clients is asking us to look at this is what they call DFMA in the manufacturing industry. It's designed for manufacturing and assembly. So how do you design your design get designed to be able to allow it to be assembled? So, they design every bolt on a car, and then it's got to be in a certain place so a person can actually reach the bolt and put it in place. Like that whole thought process, but that's what you need if construction is moving to production as more of a production process. Does that come along as well? Just completely rethinking the design process and how we go about it.
And that points to, sorry, Tom, I see you unmuting too. If you want to go first, that points to a huge issue in this disconnect between design and construction, that designing things to be built is not necessarily how things are being done right now, right? Constructability and means and methods, the way that our industry has evolved, that's not necessarily a design criteria. Whereas on most of the projects that we do, that's the final design is a direct outcome of how we're going to build it. The means and methods really impact what we end up with as a product. So I'm sure, Tom, you've got a lot to say about that.
Yeah, but it's interesting to think about all these kind of things we're talking about. If you did get to where people closer to where you could virtually design something to construct it, if you did get multiple trades doing that, aren't you then building kind of a master model that isn't just the architect at the end of the day saying, here you go, contractually, it's your model. It's the model that everybody used to virtually define what they're going to construct and how they're going to construct it. And you almost envision this day where we all sit at a table and say, Ryan, you guys good? Have you done all of your iterations and checks? And Tim, Jim, everybody kind of signs off on that model. Let's go build. And the other interesting thing, talking about, the NFTs and all these other things going on in our worlds right now, the fact that the four of us are on a computer or a panel may actually help too, because it's getting to where if we can't do this virtually, it's just going to cost too much to get on a plane half the time. It takes too long. If you start getting comfortable with it, you could see it being almost a catalyst to say all these things that we've just talked about all coalesce around this kind of single entity work platform. You get it earlier. We're comfortable looking at it earlier. We're comfortable in what we're looking at. We're figuring out more. You're not just trying to get to that next stage so that you can get to the next stage so you can build it. You're thinking about building it as early as you possibly can. So.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, there's one I wanted to quote one of your colleagues who I recently read in an article. They said, there's room for change in every project. And I think it was your Dirk Kestner, who's the director of sustainability design. And he said it about our need to lower embodied carbon footprints, which is also true. But I think the adage applies here. If there was one thing that our audience's teams could do to prepare for more mindful data sharing, or getting to the result that we're all talking about, we need our entire industry to embrace, because we can't do it alone, right? If we adopt it, and even if we were all on a team together doing it for a single project, that's not going to shift the industry. And what we're talking about here is shifting the industry. And so we need everyone to be a part of this. But what one thing would you say really allows us to be more mindfully data sharing, to not have to sign a file transfer agreement, or to basically require people to use the information we pass along, so that we're catalysts to understanding that we're giving them information they don't even want because it's not important to them downstream?
Yeah, I think we probably all have some thoughts and ideas on that. One interesting thing is if we all just kind of stick to the tight description of our contracts and our job descriptions, then almost nothing works out. That's kind of true more broadly in the world. That's even, I think, a kind of labor strike, right? Everybody just does exactly what they've been told to do, and things just don't work. And so I think really the first step towards that, Tim, is finding like-minded partners that we can trust enough to lean into these kind of processes, because the change is going to really be ahead of, I think the work that we need to do is going to be ahead of somebody coming along and saying, okay, here's an entirely new process for us to plug into. On each project, we're going to have to find together, what are the pain points on this project? What are the problems that need innovation? Because we don't want to just innovate without, we don't want to create solutions to problems that don't exist. What are the problems on this project? And let's, with trusted partners, try to solve those problems using this mindset. And I think, we're down the road on this a bit and starting to see that, once you stack up 1, 2, 3 life cycles of projects with this, then you really start to get to something. But I don't think we can do everything that we've talked about on one project overnight.
Well, it certainly started the conversation. I thank you guys for joining me on the panel. I mean, we hope that our audience is listening to and hearing this. And if you want to reach out to any of us, please do, because we are certainly as a group going to be continuing this conversation. So thank you guys for being a part of the panel. Thanks for being a part of this great discussion.
Yeah,
Patricia, over to you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. This has been an incredible conversation, and a special thank you to Tim for moderating. All right, for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.